The three of us back again.
Back together again.
Las Leonas.
I was going to say the three amigos, and then that felt wrong.
No, but we have Las Leonas.
Yeah, that's true.
On day 3048 of January.
Oh, God. It is over officially soon. We have like 5 hours to go. So if it isn't over, at least we were all together for it.
Let's not count hours, because the last time I counted hours was when my in-laws were over, and I told my daughter, it's only 8 hours. What could possibly go wrong?
Uh-huh. Everyone, you know that voice. You know that voice by now. That is the dulcet voice of Adriana Herrera, one of our very, very favorites. At this point, basically just like the third.
Our third, yeah, right.
The third.
It's Edna and Mr. Impossible and you, or it's you and me and Sarah, and I think those are the same.
Fated Mates or an Adriana Herrera sandwich, whatever you want to.
And Adriana's with us because we are debunking the myths of historical romance today on Fated Mates. And welcome, everyone, to Fated Mates. I'm Sarah McLean. I read romance novels, and I write them.
I'm Jennifer Prokop, a romance reader and editor.
And we are here with Adriana Herrera, whose new book is out.
Yeah, and we are going to, before we debunk, we are going to bunk in with this amazing book that I love so much and is on sale now. It is so good. So, Adriana, talk to me about why you're still alive, how you wrote this book 700 times.
Why you're still alive.
How am I still alive?
Because I think I have at least 23 texts that are like, you're like, this book's going to kill me. But it hasn't.
23.
So tell us about it.
So, so this book was quite a challenge, as you both know, since you had to pull me off the ledge more than once as I wrote it and edited it. It was really kind of like the hardest revision I've ever done. I think it's because I was taking on a lot of topics that I didn't want to get wrong or mishandle.
Yeah.
But I am pretty happy with it, and I hope people, a lot of the readers of this series have been waiting for Apollo's book.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope people are happy with the Apollo that I wrote. I am happy with him. Like, even though this book, as Jen said, almost took my life, in the end, I am pretty happy with it. I feel like I told my agent yesterday when I was having a nervous breakdown with her on the phone that at least I finished it how I started it. I wanted to finish it strong, and I feel like I did that. So I am pretty happy with it. I mean, it's, I think, the sexiest book in the series.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the sexiest books I've written. Apollo is intense. I don't know. I love this book. I think it's the best one I've written so far. And I am very glad that I am done with the Leonas. I am glad to be done with this summer in Paris, because, baby, it's been 4 years.
You know, it's so funny. I was talking to somebody the other day about the fact that you start a series and you're so excited, and romance series often come in 3, and you're like, I know exactly what it's going to look like. Here are the 3 characters. This is how it's going to go. Everything's going to be great. And then by the time you get to book 3, you're like, thank God I never have to come back to these people. And the big problem is that if you ever write a 4-book series, you are writing the 4th book and you're like, why? Why have I done this to myself? And then you promise yourself you'll never do it again. And then a decade later, you do it again. And you're like, wait a second, mistakes were made.
Okay, we're here to talk about Adriana today.
No. But I'm just saying, like, 3 books are tricky. Like, it is, by the time you get to the end, you are often, like, ready to say goodbye. But you've also, like, leveled up. And now you've told this, like, big story that you've been leading up to.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of me, I wanted to challenge myself to see if I could write something that was like almost on the edge of historical fiction, where I could really do like really include a lot of history, but also still manage to deliver on like the conventions and the expectations of a historical romance reader in terms of like the tension and the trappings of like the balls and the carriages and like all the stuff that you expect as a, and you know, it was challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and obviously, we are not the only ones who think it's great, because Amazon picked it as one of its best romances of February. So that is, like, I think we are not alone, right? Everyone, we all know that it's brilliant, right? It got a Kirkus star, correct?
It sure did. I'm happy with. I mean, I'm happy with it. I'm just and happier even that to be ready to do other things.
Okay. Yeah.
I wish I was the kind of author who could write the same thing but different. It is so much. I think it's like a great thing to be. If you are that author, don't ever change.
Don't
Count
seek
your
out another
blessings.
path. That is the path.
I am not that kind of person. I need to reinvent the wheel every time, which feels tiring. But
Well, and I mean, you really wrote, I mean, I remember when you were writing the first book, and you were like, I've never written historical before. So this is right. So to have this third book be such a triumph, because I really do think it is all the things that you mentioned. And so I want you to talk about writing, like a sort of how you got to Apollo and Aurora, and then also like, because this is a book that is not just finishing up a series, like it is really out there hunting big game in terms of, which is like not a phrase we've used for a minute on this podcast,
Mhm.
which is really what we have, we only say that about books that are really like, I have a big story that I'm going to tell through these characters. And it is, you mentioned the history, and like one of the things we'll talk about later is like a lot of people are like, I don't want to learn what I'm reading, but like the history in this book is really the history of conception, like of contraception, the history of like women's healthcare, specifically in not just in Latin America, but in Europe. And it was, I am not exaggerating, I was fascinated by the reading of this book. And I know
Mhm.
how much research you did for it, but like, and of course, what a time to have written such a book, right?
Yes. I mean, it's funny because just before we started to record this, I was like online, and that's very a fraught thing to be doing in January of 2020. And I just saw someone that I follow who is a physician say that the page on the CDC that shared knowledge about contraception methods is down. It's gone dark. And that they knew, like doctors had gotten word that this was going to happen, and that it's now gone. And so, within that context, I feel like this is kind of like where I hoped we wouldn't be when this book came out. Like I hope that when this book came out, and as I was writing it, and I always intended for Aurora's book to have some kind of content around the fight for reproductive rights. And when I conceptualized it, we still had Roe v. Wade. But the world, like the Dominican Republic where I'm from, it's still not legal to receive an abortion. And so like there's still a lot of story to tell in terms of the fight for reproductive justice for women globally. And I tried to write a series that was not so, centered around America, that it felt a little bit more like it was like kind of like more world history. So in that sense, as I wrote it, I was hoping, like knowing, like once Roe v. Wade fell, then I really was like, I need to go hard. And I thought, and I mean, Sarah, we all talk about this. Like we thought by the time this book comes out, there's going to be a lot more.
Yeah, we'll have all gone hard.
We will have all, like, there'll be more books like this where there's like a real conversation about like what women are experiencing and like how we fight for our rights to be return to us, right? So that didn't happen like I thought. So many things in romance don't happen like I think. But I really wanted to honor that fight, but like really try to like remind myself as I was writing that like we've been here before, and like it's a time to be brave, right? And like if romance is where women go to for comfort, we can't hide from the truth of what's happening to us.
Yeah.
Like we can't hide in romance. We have to find strength in it. And that is what I try to do with this book. Like I could have just written a book about carriages and ballrooms, which, you know, is lovely to read, but it's not the time for that. That's not what I came to do in romance. Like I came to write about the women that like raised me and write about the type of woman that I want to be in the world. Like when we're up against the corner, baby, like let's fight.
Yes.
And it's interesting that you say that, because I think before this series, right, you wrote the Dreamers series, which was MM, and then you've written a lot of other things, right? You wrote a contemporary series, you know, in concert with this at the beginning. You've written category, you've written all over the place, all sorts of things, but you chose historical for this story.
Yes,
and I think that's part of why it is so. I think one of the things that I am so grateful for with this book and with your coming to historical is that you have always struck me as a person who understands the work of historical within the context of the work of romance writ large. Because I do think there are things that historical can do that contemporary can't do in the same way. So can you talk about why historical was the space for these women?
I mean, for one, I think it's important. Like, I think it's important to just like honor what happened before, right? Like the women who did have to have that fight. It feels a little bit more organic, even though like it almost feels a little counterintuitive these days. It was a little more nuanced even 2 years ago to use historical as like a vessel for talking about current issues. Now it feels almost like historical is kind of like a softer landing, because talking about like the world right now is like really hard, right? So, but it felt like it feels organic, because if it's something that is not like to the reader, it would feel natural and make sense that you would have a book where a woman is like up against, right? Like a woman is striving, fighting, and it's always been that place in romance where like a lot of the conversations about women's autonomy, women's agency, power dynamics have been like, it's almost like the obvious thing to take on is in historical are these like topics and these themes. And so like for that reason, it just feels like the natural place to explore these things. And for me specifically, because I'm writing about women of color, specifically Latina women who are Black, who are like on the move. And there's just there's no place in the genre really where we're written in that way. Not like now Liana has her series, but like Spanish speaking women from, you know, the colonized Americas were not present in historical. So I had to kind of like really create a space for them. And it's like almost like a callback to me of like, there's so much in the genre that talks about the suffragists and like the women who were like, I mean, there's like a rich like library of that kind of book in historical, even though, you know, people kind of dismiss it as being outdated. But the reality is that there's a lot of people that have been working for a long time to make historical a place where you can find that kind of book. And I just wanted to like make sure that like the women from Latin America who were doing all of that were also present.
This week's episode of Fated Mates is brought to you by 1001 Dark Nights, publishers of From Friends to Forever, a Love Grows collection.
You know, I love a bind-up of novellas from multiple authors, and I love it when they're connected with a theme. 1001 Dark Nights has been doing this for a little while, and they've got one out right now that is for everyone who wishes that we talked more about Friends to Lovers books here at Fated Mates. As we know, Friends to Lovers is like usually just like a warm hug of a romance, right? Like it's people who already care about each other, just falling deeply, deeply in love. And truly, what 1001 Dark Nights has done here is collected 4 stories from 4 just crackerjack romance novelists. You're going to get The Gravedigger's Son by Dorinda Jones, Memories of You by Jay Kenner, More Than Possess You by Shayla Black, and Securing Jane by Susan Stoker. And this is going to give you every one of those like happy Friends to Lovers romance feels, but also a taste of 4 authors, some of whom you might never have read before. So the best thing about these books is that you always find somebody new to immediately go and glom a backlist from.
So if you love Friends to Lovers, then you should check out From Friends to Forever. It is available in print or with your monthly subscription to Kindle Unlimited. And if your podcasting app supports it, you can click on the chapter title right now to be taken to buy the book. Thanks to 1001 Dark Nights for sponsoring this week's episode. And like you said, like when you were writing the book, you didn't know where we would be right now.
No.
But I do think that there is a way in which a lot of women in particular, we know, are very much frozen by how to make the world better.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like white women, especially, like I'll speak for my people, we're just like, you know, so helpless. I don't know. Like, right. It just seems bad. I guess I'll just get on my keyboard and type things. And I think like one of the things that I find really powerful about historical romance is like as a literal blueprint for how to fight, right? Like you, I'm like, okay, we are backed into a corner now. I'm not going to lay down here. How are we going to fight? Or what are we going to fight for? And one of the things for me that's really powerful about Aurora's background is how much of her commitment to medicine is really driven by her own experiences, like that she went through as a teenager. And this is something I have like talked to my husband about. My husband does medical school admissions. And I remember at one point, like this is like kind of way back when he first started, he was like, you know, it's really interesting. Like when I interview kids, like they all have like, you know, kind of like I hear a lot like sort of a similar story kind of like all the time. And I was like, well, isn't that because like maybe there's a certain set of experiences that if people have them, it opens up the door to like, I want to be a doctor, right? And I think that given her experiences, but also like just becoming a doctor was a fight for her. And yet this is something that she is, you know, extremely. I mean, like I love her. I would want a doctor to care for me and care about me the way she cares about her patients.
Well, thank you. Me too. Like, wouldn't that be nice? I mean, I think for me, like one of the things for like with Apollo specifically, because I really was trying to write I mean, that's the kind of hero I write. Like I need to write a man who can really see the woman that he's with and see the value in what she wants or what she's doing and just like go all in for her. And I think even for Apollo, when the beginning was just like, well, now I'm Duke and I just kind of want to stick it to them. Yeah. And like, that's what I'll do. Mm-hmm. I'll just be here black and breathing and just driving them crazy. And doing good stuff on the side, but really just being here black and breathing and making them crazy. And so like, because his mom died, like, again, to me, it's like the piece of in this world that we're in right now. And I really thought about that a lot. Like the kind of man that is in your life. Like if you have a man in your life who doesn't like see the value in women being okay, then you're sleeping with the enemy. You have to like really have men who are willing to be brave too, because the patriarchy is so comfortable. Being a man is easy as fuck out here. Even the ones that are upset about stuff. Like
Right.
They have to be brave. They have to be willing to say, like, I might lose the things that I have and my comfort and my safety in some ways to make your life safe. And I think, like, I don't know, like, I think those are all the things that I feel very much in my life right now. And I think just unfortunately,
Yeah.
they were also the things, like the themes that were coming up in that book. Yeah, I mean, I honestly, like, I hoped more than anything that when this book came out, the conversations that I was having were like, phew, look what we almost avoided. Like, okay, like we've had a couple of losses in the last few years, but like we can get it back.
Yeah. No, right now it
And
feels...
now it feels like it's very like,
No, it's terrifying.
yeah, like this is like, we're very close to, like, Comstock laws are not far off.
Well, the
right?
Comstock laws are still in the books.
Yeah. And like just today, like people are trying to, like, I mean, again, like not to like doom and gloom it, but like I just, to me, this whole series has been really important. To write women who have found partners who really love them and who like see the value of their dreams and want to help them pursue them.
Mm-hmm.
But also like things that are important to me as a feminist and a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I have always thought that was like the job of romance.
Yeah, me too. Silly me. I have a question for you, actually. What you said just made me think of something. Before we actually say that, can I tell you, I saw on social media today that somebody was calling this, they were talking about like reconstruction and they're calling like what we're going through now deconstruction. And I was like, that's a little too on the nose. So anyway, here's my question. Okay, I have a question for you. Okay, so I think of myself as a feminist, but I also think that my feminist like knowledge, my knowledge of feminism is not very, I think it's just patchy. I don't think I'm like an idiot. But your knowledge of feminism is so impressive to me. Like I really am always like, well, Adriana would know. So can we have maybe a minute where we talk about, like, I think a really common thing, it used to be really easy to say, is that like romance is all romance is feminist. And I think some of us, I know, I found solace in the idea that just like back when we would say like it's by women and for women, like a genre that like, as a whole, right, talks about the interests of women and marginalized people is like feminist in some, like, right, in some way. But I don't think I'm comfortable saying that anymore, right? So when you think of like feminism and romance or feminism in general, what do you think romance has to do to earn the label of feminism and like have that be an accurate one? And Sarah, you can answer this too, because you also know a lot about feminism, obviously.
I mean, I think you have to think about equity. Like you have to think about power dynamics. You have to think about, like, is this about the soft life, or is it about like proximity to power? And, I don't think all romance is feminist. I think in this day and age, you have to work at it to make it be feminist, actually, because I think there is a lot of I mean, you can see it now. Like we thought we had won all the big fights. And the reality is that there's like 53% of the white women in this country are willing to take a chance on a crazy man. Can I say that on this podcast?
You can absolutely say that on this podcast.
Have you listened to this podcast?
Yeah. Well,
a felon, a feminist, like a person who has been, brought charges on him for assaulting women, take a chance on him. And so to me, and like a lot of those women probably read romance, and so I think part of it is like the reality is that no, like because if the romance that you're reading is a romance where the only person that gains freedom and comfort is the heroine, and that's the only thing that matters in that book, then it's actually not feminist. Because feminism is about freedom and justice for everyone. And if that's not what's achieved at the end of the book, if the world is not better, not just her life, the world that that began in her book isn't better, her community isn't better, her worldview isn't bigger, then it's not feminist. I'm sorry, like it's just not. I mean, she can be happy.
Right, sure, but that's sure.
So, but it's really interesting to me because I obviously came from the school of like romance felt feminist in its DNA. And I think part of why a lot of white women especially felt this way in the second wave was because it was the first time they had ever seen a product that was designed with them as the main consumer, right? So like there's capitalism, like there's all sorts of stuff wrapped up in this, right? Like this is a complex conversation, but I think that at its like basic level for a lot of white women, like they picked up Gentle Rogue and they saw a woman going forth for like what she wanted in a way that they'd never seen anything like that before. And so I think the aspirational idea that like romance is feminist is in the hope that like the women who read about Georgina Anderson turned into women like us who like thought of themselves as being able to go forth and make the world better, like and be bigger and be bolder and change things, right? And stand up. But I think that was 50 years ago. And now that's not enough. And I fear that for a lot of us in the industry, we are resting on the laurels of those, ironically, like, because I think we're also going to get into a lot of young readers are like, what the fuck? These are not laurels, right? And I acknowledge that. But like, we're resting on that idea that like the female gaze made the product feminist and therefore we are all feminist. But it really is starting to, I don't know if it's that I am becoming more progressive or that the genre is becoming more regressive.
I think it's that one, if I can be honest.
But I don't know, like, or both.
I think maybe a little more conservative, and like we don't, because I think part of it too, and I remember having this number when I remember when I was working in Ithaca, a lot of the people under my supervision were women who had just finished college. They were like in their early 20s, and I was like, their feminism auntie. And like
You're my feminism auntie. What's the problem?
Let me introduce you to bell hooks.
And the idea that like, I was thinking about this today. I think we're equating feminism with like sexual freedom, which is an important component. And I think I love that the books are sexier and they're hotter, but even like, how are they hotter is an important question. And like, okay, the sex is really hot and really explosive in this book, but what are the conversations happening around power and what are the dynamics in that book? And is it like, are the books more conservative, but the sex hotter? Because it's, you could still have a lot of sex and still have like pretty patriarchal ideas that you're like taking on. So again, I think the world's complicated.
This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by Jen Bouchard, author of Considering Us.
So, Private Chef Devin Page is a little bit messy, Sarah. She has had an affair that has caused a scandal, and she essentially only has one client left in Boston, and she cannot really make a living off of a professional basketball player who just likes cookies. And so she has no other choice but to take a job at a boarding school in New Hampshire. And what she's going to be doing is leading their dining services, but she is shocked to discover that also on staff is Kyle Halling. And she and Kyle had a one-night stand essentially the night before they each went off to their respective colleges 15 years ago. And she's interested in him, but she also is like hyper aware of like she's messed up, and they're in the fishbowl of this like boarding school with like a underground newspaper, and everybody, it just seems like, is watching them. So she decides like she cannot take this. She is going to head out to Los Angeles. There's like another guy she's maybe interested in out there, only Kyle is going to end up road tripping with her. And so maybe it is on this trip, when it's just the two of them, that Devin and Kyle can figure out if 15 years is too late to rekindle a one-night stand.
Wow. Well, if you love a forced proximity, friends to lovers, one that got away story, this one sounds like it's perfect for you. You can find Considering Us right now in print, ebook, audiobook, or with your monthly subscription to Kindle Unlimited. If your podcasting app supports it, you can click on the chapter title right now to be taken to buy the book. And thanks to Jen Bouchard for sponsoring this week's episode. A lot of the times when feminism comes up as a word in these conversations, there's this sort of defensiveness that comes from segments of us, right? That sort of feels like, well, we solved feminism. Like, feminism is here. So, like, now we can do whatever we want because we all know, right? We all understand that, like, what this is just like fantasy, or it's just this idea that, and I know everybody out there is like, Sarah's talking about dark romance, and maybe I am a little bit, but I'm also talking about like these heroes who like have never done a bad thing. They've never thought a bad thought. They've never misstepped. They've never had to learn about how to be, about equity, about any of this stuff. They are just like perfect creatures set
or that
down.
They come. Or like the implication is, I mean, to me, part of it is this. Like, I love a therapized hero.
Yeah, but they're not perfect, Adriana.
But they're not perfect. And part of what I think is we deserve is to see a man grow on the page and come against and see the realities of our lives, right? And like that, I think, is something like, I mean, just thinking about like Apollo and Aurora, right? Like Apollo is who he is. And like someone that in the beginning thinks, like I'm just like irreverent and I can do whatever I want. And then more and more he begins to see how little, like there's a line in the book where he's like, well, my dad hurt me, so I basically destroyed him in his life. And her dad hurt her and she's saving people.
Yeah. Right. Correct.
And so, like, the difference is that, like, if you don't have a man that man needs to have that real, like, I feel like part of what we do as romance novelists is have a man start there and come to that realization on the page. Like, I think part of the arc, I guess.
To your point, though, and I think this is something I want to say out loud because I feel like the thing that I've learned so much from you, Adriana, but the thing that I think about all the time that I've learned from you about the genre is we gave a talk at Yale, what was that, last year? And it was like a kind of intro to the romance genre, right? Like, what is romance? And we were talking about the bones of it and all the pieces and the character and the conflict and the voice and the world building and all the pieces. And you were like, but we also have to talk about theme, right? Like sitting down and starting from a place of, I'm going to tell a story that does something, right? And I think for many of us as writers, like the theme comes later. Like you get to the end of the story and you say, oh, I'm telling a story about whatever I'm telling a story about. Or maybe we don't get there at all, right? Like we've just told this story and it makes us feel good and that's that. But like your work, capital W, in romance, both on the page and like with me, with other people who are writers in the genre, is to say like, but what if we are doing something from the jump? What if we are telling a story about reproductive justice from the jump? And I think that's what you have done for a generation of romance writers.
Oh, that feels like a lot.
But I mean, I think it's true because Jen and I talked to a million trillion women and men who have written in this genre from the beginning. And I don't think anybody has said that.
Kate does. Kate starts from theme.
I'm not talking about Kate. I'm talking about trailblazers. Like I'm talking about.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like, right. Like the people who write. And that's, I mean, I was saying like starting from Kennedy Ryan, right? Starting from trope versus starting from theme is going to get you to an incredibly different place because you're really thinking about what, I mean, I live a small life and I don't mean that but my life, and I guess what I'm trying to say is like, you can have a small life, but a purposeful one. And I think that when you start from theme, that's what you are doing.
I also would say to everybody listening, like some people get to theme in a different way. They don't start with theme, but they get there in the end.
Yeah.
You don't have to start there, but I do think that choosing to start there is a modern construct.
I think for historical, it's almost at this point, I think, because why are you going into historical these days, right? Like what are we going into the past for, if not to say something? And so, I mean, and not everybody has to say something again, but I think if you want that feminism badge, you don't need to have it, but if you do want it, if you do think that you are someone that's writing under that, like with that heritage of feminism as like a value, like I've always said, like if I don't have a religion, but if I had one, it would be feminism. Like I think you then do have to say, like, what am I saying here? Like, what am I saying? What am I after?
And it's getting harder. Like, it's getting harder because in the early days of the genre, you could just write a suffragette.
Correct. Or an abolitionist.
Right? Or an abolitionist. Or you could write, like, a duke who, like, got all of his money, but, like, treated his servants very well. Right? Like, and you could sort of wave away the rest of it. And that worked because it was shorthand for a different kind of work. Now we're in a place, though, where the work is more difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more difficult. I think, having a heroine who is also an aristocrat and who is white and benefits from the privilege of wealth and power and is complicit in oppressions happening, like, it's not enough that she has like she goes out and gives baskets to the poor. Like, it's just not enough. It's not enough that she's like sharing information with her friends about, how not to get pregnant. Like, I think it's like more than that. Like, I think, again, if you're trying to make it feminist, like, you don't have to do it like that.
That's the thing, is like, this isn't a directive to go out and write feminist text, but be careful about claiming the mantle in 2025 because it's a more serious weight now by virtue of what we are living in.
You have to make, as artists, as authors who are writing from feminist values, we have to meet the moment. Like, that's how I feel. Like, you have to meet the moment that you are in. And the moment that we are in is not a moment to hide from the realities of our life. And still, like, again, and like, hopeful, like, it's not like Apollo and Aurora are not like having sex every other chapter. Like, it's a sexy book. They have a happy ending in community. They, like, it's like I felt like, I try to make it as triumphant as possible, like an ending with hope, with the women getting what they wanted. And still, like, I had to have those place the realities and like just how badass we're. Like, to me, like, that's part of it. Like, there were like anarchist women in Argentina 100 years ago that were being like exiled because they were like, fuck what husbands, and like, we're starting a union and we're like bombing this factory that's exploiting workers. Not that I'm advising anybody to bomb a factory, but like, what I'm saying is 100 years ago, women were being brave and amazing.
So you can be brave and amazing now. Like, to me, right? Like, that is why, like, when a historical romance is really firing, it makes me feel like, if I, with all the tools I have, with the right, like, if they can do it then with, like, you can fucking print shit in your house, right? Then what am I, then, you know what I mean? Like, and listen, you guys, I need to practice being brave, right? This is not innate in me, in my character. And so I think that is part of the reason why, like, historical romance, like, really calls to me. Like, these are women who arguably had a lot of everything was worse, right? There are freedoms I have that they do not have there. And that has led, even if they take those freedoms from me, they cannot change the way I think. Right. And that is, I think, part of why I'm so fascinated by, again, like, I mean, Apollo is great in this book, but like, I really also, like, I just love Aurora so much.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because here is a woman who is like, I've had a lot of shit happen to me. I've had a lot of people tell me I can't do what I'm going to do. I've had my family try to fence me in, and she is just not going to put up with any of that shit. And I love her. I love her so much. I'm sorry.
You.
Yeah.
I love her too. Yeah, I mean, I just feel like we all need to be braver right now. And like, I think this genre has the power to do so much. And I feel like it's like, and we've been having this conversation, but I know we're going to have later about how like historical perhaps is like, just like, like kind of like on its like twilight, let's say, in terms of like reader interest. And I wonder if part of it is because of so many conversations like this, like in the last 10, even earlier, like I feel like mid 2015, like you were doing that, Sarah. Joanna was doing it. Even Sherry Thomas was doing, like, really, KJ Charles were like writing romances and historical that were like grappling with class difference. We're grappling with like the inconsistencies of the aristocracy. We're trying to have more diversity in there. And like, I think that does challenge the reader in ways that they're not used to. Like, that muscle is not developed in the reader to tolerate like reading things that make them feel a certain way. And I wonder if that is part of what, in the end, like maybe making historical a little bit more historically accurate or self-aware is where the reader kind of felt like I lost the fantasy, but at the same time, like, can't the fantasy be we deal with these difficult things and still have the happy ending?
This week's episode of Fated Mates is brought to you by Sophie Lark, author of Kingmakers Year One.
Okay, so this is the first in Sophie's Kingmaker series, which is hugely popular, and it follows the students of Kingmakers, a ruthless mafia university, where the offspring of the world's most feared families come to like master influence and intimidation, and I don't know, like learn to make a great red sauce. This particular book, it follows Leo and Anna, who are both, they arrive, they are childhood best friends, and they arrive at Kingmakers for a really like tough time. Leo maybe didn't have to come, but Anna definitely did. Her family was like, you gotta go. And Leo has come to like make sure she's safe in this world where like everything is a weapon and you can't trust anybody. And there's this big question of like, will everybody be strong enough to survive? Of course. So what begins as this sort of like you and me against the world romance morphs into something very different and very dark when Dean Yenin, a Bratva heir and cousin to Leo, turns up with like a mega vendetta against him, instantly discovers that Anna is the way to punish him, and then aims directly for Anna. Of course, like Dean falls in love with her, except is it really love? It's probably more like obsession. And Anna's trapped between the two of them for a little while. But the truth is, like, only one of these guys is her true soulmate. And what you're going to get here is all the like delicious, dark juiciness that Sophie Lark delivers.
Okay, so if you are interested in reading Kingmakers Year One, it is available in print or with your monthly subscription to Kindle Unlimited. And if your podcasting app supports it, you can click on the chapter title right now to be taken to buy the book. Thanks to Sophie Lark for sponsoring this week's episode.
Like a month ago or 6 weeks ago, Alexandria Bellefleur, who we've talked about on the podcast, writes queer contemporary romances, but is a historical reader, asked in response to the kind of kerfuffle online about historical dying. And we should probably talk a little bit about is historical dying and like why people are saying that too. I think it's worth us sort of bringing everybody up to speed because I do think like there are a lot of whispers around and everybody's sort of subtweeting or whatever that is called on threads. But in response to that, Alexandria built a Google Doc, a survey, and put it out to her readers and recognizing like Alexandria writes queer romance. She writes romance for that tends to be sort of read by a younger, newer kind of romance reader. And she said, do you read historicals? If no, why? Essentially, were the questions in this survey. And then she was very generous because she gave us the results and said, because I said, well, could we do an episode on it? And she was like, sure, enjoy yourself. So I guess before we even start, I just want to say, we'll put links to Alexandria's books in show notes. I've talked about Alexandria's books on the podcast before, but go support her because this is a very cool thing that she did for us. Anyway, is historical dying? I feel like there is something definitely going on with historical, and it's impossible for us not to acknowledge that as a genre. Certainly in traditional romance, something is up.
Traditionally published
published romance. Something is up at the publishing houses. There are very, very few and growing fewer historical careers and historical books. And we're going to talk about a few of them, I'm sure, as we talk today. But a lot of people are pivoting and a lot of people are not having their contracts renewed. And a lot of publishing houses are just throwing up their hands and saying, we don't know how to make it work. I don't think it's dying. But I think whatever is about to happen is going to happen probably on the indie side.
Is she dying or are they killing her?
Exactly. I mean, there are a lot of things at play here, right? Like mass market, the small trim size. You can't find that on bookshelves anymore, like in stores. The covers never, while all the other subgenres, the covers were evolving. They did not evolve in historicals at all. We knew kind of right away that illustrated covers weren't going to necessarily like change the game in historical the way that they did in contemporary, but the houses didn't, put energy behind figuring out what a new historical cover would look like. Now, it feels like this month we're starting to see like a few, hey, maybe this will works, but, and then there is the kind of believing the myth that is happening too. I think a lot of young people at publishing houses are believing the loud voices online saying historical is old, historical is boring, historical is, racist, historical is all of these things that in some cases it is, but that's not special to historical one.
Right. I was like that. Yeah.
And I think that I think there's so much. I don't know. I can't even think of what the other things are that are killing it, but it feels like a lot of things are killing it.
Yeah, I was thinking this today, like in terms of like, well, I don't want to read about rich people, but it's like billionaire romance is more popular than ever. Like, can you write an ethical billionaire romance in the age of
right
the oligarchy?
I was going to say, and then there's the Adriana's point, and I mean, we've all said it in different ways, but like the rise of fantasy should deliver us a larger interest in historicals, but it doesn't seem to be doing that. Bridgerton should have delivered readers to historicals, but didn't seem to do that. And so I think, is she dying or are they killing us?
Are they killing? I mean, part of it to me, I think, is also like the huge influx of new readers that have come into romance, bigger than, and I've been around as a reader for a very long time. All of us have. And Sarah, you've been around as a writer for...
I'm a crone. I'm a crone.
A minute. And within that time, like, I think the last big influx that I saw was 2012, 50 Shades of Grey, with the advent of the ebook. And Amazon Kindle like truly brought in a massive influx of people and essentially created the billionaires subgenre, which is still thriving. And so like, and again, I feel like that, but at that time, I think historical was still like in a strong place. And I feel like in this new wave of like the book talk wave, the pandemic wave, contemporary was what was on the rise. And then, Sarah J. I do believe that romantasy is like the subgenre that Sarah J. Maas built.
Yeah.
I think
a huge historical reader, by the way. Like,
yeah,
who screams about them all the time.
Right. It's in the bones of how she,
Leigh Bardugo, a huge historical reader, like so many of these big series. Her heroes are historical romance heroes. Like, it's in like the water that, but again, like 50 Shades of Grey created billionaire romance. Right. I think ACOTAR has brought in this new subgenre that's romantic, that's super strong. And I think that reader could eventually make its way to... But they have to exist for them to get there.
But they have to exist to get there. Because they can get to a place where they're going to release, like, the Ravenels or the Wallflowers, but they need stuff that's been written in the last 5 years first.
That's fundamentally the issue, right? Like, I think, and I'm not going to, I'll name it. The lions of the historical genre largely are not writing. And I think, and I include in that, like, the most recent kind of crop of bestseller historical romance writers are not writing. Tessa Dare hasn't written in 5 years. Lisa Kleypas is notoriously slow. Julia Quinn hasn't written a new Bridgerton book in X number of years, in many years. And so I think, I took a break. Like, there are a number of people who have not been sort of building the genre the way, but you also can't rely on 5 names.
Right.
To keep a genre.
And part of, I think, what's happened because of the way the industry's moving is that, like, that mid-list, which was really what shored up the genre, because, like, you had Loretta,
right?
Lorraine Heath, you had Loretta Chase. So it was like, Lord of Scandal. So I don't even know if I could say, I don't know. She's her own genre.
She's also a slow writer. So yeah.
Right.
But you have like these, like you have Sophie Jordan, you have like all these authors, Eva Lee, you had Megan France. You had Harper St. George.
The entire Avon list. Joanna Shoup.
Joanna Shoup. So many women. My goodness, like Beverly Jenkins is still writing romance, and I think like you had this very robust historical catalog that if you happen to be blessed and finding Devil in Winter while you're out, with your granny at the library sale, and like, you like
Right. Come
end
in, the
up
water
reading
is fine.
300 books in 6 months, like a lot of us do, like you'll make your way through that entire backlist, and then you'll do the backlist of another. And I think part of what is happening is that there's like, where do they go? There's Evie Dunmore, who came in the last few years.
Well, or you have to be in the Amazon ecosystem and reading Kindle Unlimited and be able to sort of wade your way through the discoverability problem, right? That really faces that. And if you are not a person who has historical romance reading friends, then your discoverability problems are even more intense, right?
Yeah.
I mean, especially because I will say, like what I said from the beginning, it's going to live in indie. And the reason why I say that is because, I mean, there are so many names I have never heard before in indie. Like when we're next week, everybody spoiler, but next week is another historical episode, and we've been prepping for it. And I mean, I downloaded 30 something books to my Kindle my only goal was people I'd never heard of.
We've never mentioned it. Right. We've never but next week will be historical romances where we've never, like, new to us historical authors, right?
And so, like, there are so many. And, like, listen, I'm not going to talk about all 30 of them, and for reasons. But, like, I will, like, there's so much going on there that I think, like, we're in this, like, nascent kind of stage of, like, we are going to, the genre is shifting massively. But that is not to say that there are not historicals that I think a new reader who is coming through Alexandria Bellefleur's recommendations wouldn't absolutely love already.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, there are, like, TJ Alexander has a book coming out in a couple of months. Like, KJ Charles is writing amazing historical romance. I think part of it is like the entire, like, I think and also because so many people are younger readers and they were reading YA fantasy. And so what fantasy just feels familiar.
No, and the irony is, everybody, if you are listening to this, if you are new to Fated Mates and you're just here for this Alexandria's data debunking, I would say you would be shocked by the similarities, because what I can tell you is that in 2010, when all of those YA fantasies were being written, I was friends with all those people, and they all, to a person, were reading historicals. So, like, I think you can see the bones of historicals, like we said, in all those fantasy novels. But let's get into some of the myths, because I think they are myths, and they are very believable because in many cases, they just feel correct. And one of the things I want to start with, or the reason why we moved into this work, is because Adriana, you said that there is a sense of the books not being connected to the diversity of now, right? And there were so many comments on this spreadsheet that were like, I only read Sapphic, right? So, like, why would I read historical? It's all MF. I only read, like, it's all white people, it's all rich people, it's all, a dominant, like, overclass. And so I wonder if we can just talk a little bit. And I think that is largely true about books from your granny's time.
I mean, so here's the thing, like, we're kind of doing like Mythbusters, but, like, some of these myths are true for a reason, right?
Of truth.
I think one of the things I'm going to just, like, say at the jump, though, is, like, one of my real struggles here is that, like, statements like that are true of, if they're true of historical romance, they're true of every subgenre, right? It is really interesting, though, to kind of try and approach this with like an open heart. I mean, I don't know who wrote, who these people are, and I want to like sort of argue with them. But, it's like I want to be like, no, you're wrong. But I really do want to like instead try and like kind of say like, okay, if this is how it feels, then how can we like sort of debunk it, right?
Well, I also think to that point, Jen, like this is a good lesson for the industry as a whole. Like Alexandria is a very popular writer. Her readers are in many cases very clearly eager to try a historical. They just don't want it to be what they think it is. And so like, I guess what I'd like to do here and what we've talked about is let's do some like hardcore recommending. This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by Chloe C. Peñaranda, author of The Night is Defying, the second in her Nightfall trilogy, available right now in audiobook.
Okay, so this is a romantasy, and it is about a vampire named Night, a villain, of course.
Nice.
And at the end of book 1, his love interest, Estrella, has become something called a star maiden. And you're going to have to read the books to find out more about this because it's like complex and interesting world building. But basically what we have is these two are on a journey together. She is trying to recover her kind of hidden or lost memories. And Night is trying to keep it together without other vampires trying to take him down for what they see as like a betrayal of like their kind. Right. And of course, that is led by his brother. So this is like a really like yummy, delicious romantasy where we really get like sort of a vampire and a star maiden. Hello. Now, the other really fun thing about this audio is that it is duet narration. And what that means is instead of it's just like he's, one chapter by Jackie and then the other chapter by Corvin, those Corvin King and Jackie Pryor are our narrators. Instead of one chapter from each of them, they also speak all their own dialogue. So even in a chapter
right. So it's
where
like a play.
Yeah, exactly. And so you really get that sense of like their sexy voices talking to each other. And it feels like a real conversation rather than just someone reading it to you. So if you love duet narration, you are definitely going to want to check out The Night is Defying.
The Night is Defying is available right now in print, ebook, and audiobook, and you can listen to it wherever you get your audiobooks. It is the second book in Chloe C. Peñaranda's Nightfall trilogy. You can also read the first book, The Stars Are Dying, in audio. As a special treat for Fated Mates listeners, you can hang around at the end of the episode and you'll hear a special sneak peek of The Night is Defying and get a taste of that narration Jen likes so much. Also, if you click on the chapter title right now, you can be taken to a sweepstakes where 5 lucky listeners will receive free copies in audio of The Night is Defying. Thanks to Chloe C. Peñaranda, Corvin King, and Jackie Pryor for sponsoring this week's episode. If you're looking for sapphic historicals, first of all, Adriana has one. It's called An Island Princess Starts a Scandal. And it's delish.
I know that Erica Ridley has written at least a couple.
Perks of Being a Wallflower.
Right. And I know that KJ Charles also has one.
Oh, does she have a sapphic one? I didn't know that.
Who?
KJ Charles.
Okay, proper English. I just reread it this week.
And the thing about me for KJ Charles, I just want to say, like, first of all, I've never read a bad KJ Charles books, but I also think KJ Charles tends to write a shorter book. Mm-hmm. She is not writing 700 page. She's writing a tight 250 pages, maybe. And so another thing I just want to say is, like, if you're like, hey, maybe I would like to read historical, but I don't know, KJ Charles might be a great place to start just because you are not locked into something that is overwhelmingly long. Right. And I mean, listen, I teach middle school. Like I want to say this to people. There is no shame at all in saying, I'm a little worried about the length of that. Right. I mean,
that's what she said.
Not in an FF romance, Adriana. That is not what she said.
That's for later in the podcast.
So I would also say, writing KJ Charles is a great place to start. For any, like, just pick up any book, right? Because I think it makes it a really easy entry point.
She doesn't write a bad book.
Can I recommend Nicola Davidson? Because everybody loves a sexy book. Nicola writes erotic historicals. She wrote a book called My Lady's Lover, which is part of her Surrey Sexual Freedom Society, about anybody who's ever read a Sarah Kate novel about, her sex club people, this is for you. This is Historical Sex Club. And Beatrice is the lady's maid to the Countess of Garrick, and she has been in love with her employer. I mean, this is like boss secretary, right? She's been in love with her employer from like the jump, and they are so incredibly hot for each other. And there's like a bad marriage that's gone wrong. And then they're just friends, and they're super duper horny for each other, but like can't possibly make good on it because of, everything that is going on in their lives. And then like one night it just all comes to a head and kaboom. And it's incredibly sexy, and you're going to love it. Also, Nicola always writes short ones too.
Yeah, right.
And loves writing a menage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep.
So if you like a poly relationship.
Yep. And there's always class difference, like really negotiated interestingly in these books. I mean, this is one of the other things that came up was class, right? Like, I always feel like, dukes, and then, everybody's a duke, but I don't think so. And I think in historicals, often class and the trappings of it, and like the bad, the ill that comes with wealth is on page a lot and negotiated a lot.
Yeah, and I mean, I think part of it is like, undeniably, there are many, 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 many dukes in historicals.
Right.
But there's also not, like, I think the historical genre is big enough. I mean, it's, again, like thinking about Westerns. Like, I love me a Western. A lot of problematic Westerns out there.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But, like, there are some that are still pretty awesome. And so, like, I think you can't, like, just, like, this genre is big enough that you almost can always find something that is, like, particularly delicious to you specifically if, like, you are adventurous. And I think part of what I would love to see readers who are just really kind of loving this genre to be more adventurous with historical, because there's a lot of big feelings there.
So let's talk about another really big topic that came up is, I would say, is like the writing of it, right? So many people sort of said, I don't like the writing. It just feels clunky, or is like kind of one side of it. And then there was a side that was that's sort of just talking in general about maybe, I don't know, like lots of vocabulary. I don't know. It, like there's a kind of world that I'm expected to know about that I don't really know. What would we say to that myth?
I'd say if you're reading romantasy, I've read quite a few of them, and a lot of them also have a lot of language that's a little confusing, and there's like a lot of different characters with a lot of names that have a lot of consonants, and everything's okay. So that's the first thing I would say.
Great. Yes.
But the second thing I would say is that, there is, I think language that is like a little bit more. I've always said the historical to me is like the Broadway of romance, where there's just like a little bit more embellishment because it's part of the vibe.
We zhuzh it up.
Yes, I want you to feel like you're being dropped into a different place and time. And so that's part of like the vibe. But also, I think there's a lot of historical romance that has language that is dynamic and extremely like straightforward.
Yeah.
Like, to me, Lisa Kleypas writes a great dialogue like nobody. But I don't find her language like clunky or boring or too forward. Like, I feel like she's such a straightforward writer.
You know who I would recommend for this too is Tessa Dare. Like,
yes,
Tessa Dare writes a great, clean, like fast-paced, very lovely romance. Like, she's a good person to start with, especially actually if you're an Alexandria fan. Like, I think she's a great, she doesn't write Sapphic, but she's a great read-alike for Alexandria. You know, the books are fun, they're sparkling, they're witty, and Tessa doesn't get bogged down in like, what does the tea set look like?
Right.
Can I ask you, I sort of assumed that some of this was code for I only read books written in first person.
Oh. Well, that also
Could be
the case.
Yeah.
Okay, can I add to that? Can I like put a second layer on that? One of the things that came up again and again in the answers was relatability. Like, I'm not able to relate to these characters. So I think that's probably like in some way connected, Jen.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. Like, I think relatability is a tricky one for historical, because I think like there is a sort of intentionality in writing characters who are choosing to live out loud and like in some sort of experience that you would never have.
It's interesting because I have such a knee-jerk negative reaction to relatability as sort of an excuse for not reading something. And that comes, I think, from two places. One, it comes from a long history of authors of color reporting, right? Like white editors saying, I can't, white publishing writ large, I can't relate to it, and therefore I can't sell it. I also am a middle school teacher, right? And I have kids who are kind of like, I don't like it, and that's kind of what they say. And I think for me, I'm just kind of like, that's always like a real weird one for me. But again, I really want to think about like, where could that be coming from in a way that's like more positive, where I'm not just like saying to a kid, like, just give it a fucking shot, will you already? Oh my God, right? Is I think that if people think that like the problems in historical romance are not the same as problems people have now. Right. So like the problem is that there were chimney sweeps and I don't have chimney sweeps. Right. But whatever. Right.
There are no historicals.
What is
where
the problem
is that there are chimney sweeps.
Tell that to Dane, who was very traumatized. I've
written a chimney sweep
up
the chimney. Yeah. Poked and fired up the chimney.
So I think that's the thing. Like, you have to, at least I would say, is like an answer to that is to bust that myth, is like, when you're reading historical romance, like the problems in historical romance are the same, right? Like the struggle for love and acceptance, right? The search for meaning in your life, right? Like breaking the bounds of either of the expectations that are hemming you in, whether that be society or family or gender or, rules are defined by your gender, or
you can't inherit the family fortune without getting married, for example.
Now that, right? Like, but like, so I guess I would say like the key is to look at whatever the problem is and not think like I can't relate to that, but like instead of saying I can't relate to it, saying how can I relate to it?
Yeah. And I feel like part of like one of the things like, oh, I feel like it's slow, like it's hard for me to get into it or whatnot. And I think perhaps it's just like what books you're starting off with. Like one book that I think is like one that should be like a primer, like one of the primer books, is The Duchess Hunt by Lorraine Heath.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's typical like competence, like secretary that is like super competent. She runs his life and she is tasked with finding him a wife.
Mm-hmm.
He's looking for, and she's in love. She's been in love with him so it's like unrequited love. But that is probably one of those historicals. Again, her language to me also is very accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't think Lorraine Heath is writing anything that's like, like Elizabeth Hoyt, for example, is a little bit the language there. You got to get used to it. Like once you get into the first sex scene, then you're like, okay, we can handle it. But like, it's Georgian, so it's it's different than like what people are used to, which is Regency and Victorian. Not that anybody's checking for accurate language or anything, but like what I'm saying is like to me, Lorraine Keys, and that is one of those books. Like immediately, you know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
She's in love with him. He like doesn't see her that way, but he admires her, respects her. And has such deep admiration for her that like it's like, dummy, you are into her. And it's one of those books that you're like just in it, instantly you're in it, because the romance, the dynamics of that romance are so familiar. And it's like the promise of it is so delicious because the tension is going to be at a 15 the entire time. And I mean, I challenge anyone to read that book and not be like, this was a great time. And that epilogue is literally,
it's the best.
I don't even know how you can find a better one.
This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by Annabelle Slater, author of The Launch Date.
So in this rom-com, we have heroine Grace Hastings. She has what she thought was a dream job at for a popular dating app called Fate, but it somehow is like a nightmare. Her new boss is just gross. Her career just seems to be stagnating, and she's just been dumped by her fiance. And so she is just really determined to like refocus on work and get it together and go after the next big promotion. And so when the company's CEO offers her that very chance, she is just determined to make it happen. And what he wants her working on is a brand new app that focuses on real life dating experiences. And so the problem is that she is going to have to develop and test drive a series of great first dates that the app users can use. And her partner in crime for this is her biggest work rival, Eric Bancroft, and he wants the same promotion that she does. So they're out there test driving these dates, disastrous hikes, dangerous cooking classes, steamy hot yoga sessions, and starting to realize that maybe their differences have been hiding that they are perfect for each other all along.
Aw. Well, if you love a workplace romance that includes fake dating and forced proximity, then The Launch Date just might be for you. You can get it right now in print or in ebook. And if your podcasting app supports it, you can click on the chapter title right now to be taken to buy the book. Thanks to Annabelle Slater for sponsoring this week's episode. So one of the things that came up again and again was like, I know the history of the world, right? And so I can't read historical because I know that these people who are having a happily ever after are having it during a time that has, enslavement, women's rights are under the boot of tyranny, children are mistreated, whatever the many things that we know exist, right? Queer people have to hide in the shadows. So how can I believe in happily ever after during a time when so many people did not have access to that?
Well, and that's where I would say it is true that for many years, historical didn't do a good enough job of making the world bigger in historical and having stories of people who were not straight, cis, white, rich people. But that is not the case today in 2025. There's a lot of people. First of all, Beverly Jenkins has been doing it since the 90s.
And as Bev says all the time, people did love, like people did have happiness.
I mean, I'm here, Black people still exist. Like, we're going to go extinct. So, that means that somewhere along the line, and I mean, we know that it wasn't just out of, sexual exploitation. Like, our ancestors actually met each other, love happened. Like, I always say, is there a stronger institution in the United States than the Black family? I don't think so. nothing has been tried by fire more than the Black family. And yet, like, people are here, love, and, like, still thriving and happy. And, and so to me, again, it's like your own sense of history is then wrong. We haven't been taught in school enough to know that people were out there finding love and figuring it out. And I think you can come to romance and read about it and experience it. Like, I mean, Beverly Jenkins Uber is, I don't know, how many books has she written?
Yeah.
150, 200 books? I don't know.
But I mean, but your point is well taken. Like, so it feels like we need to be lifting up the voices of so many of the modern writers in the genre who are doing this work, right? Like Diana Quincy writing Arab heroes and heroines, and Jeannie Lin writing, Chinese heroes and heroines.
Oh, and I just thought of, back to the first person thing, let me join these together. Vanessa Riley does something super interesting, which is in the ones that are like three, the Duke, the Lady, and the Baby, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The heroine's point of view is in first person, and the hero's point of view is in third. And so one of the things you could do is, if you think that like maybe you're struggling with this, is like that would be a great book where and it's like especially that first one was probably my favorite, a really fascinating story about a woman who is from the West Indies, and she essentially is married to this, gives birth, is her own child's wet nurse because of like the racism in the kind of what happens like right through a series of like very believable reasons. And she is like, I will do anything to be with my child.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that there is no more powerful story than that to me. And that might be a great way if you're like, I really want to start with first person, but how do I get there? Then you can have half the book in first and then like be practicing, right? Like with that third person point of view with the hero. And so I think like that is an example of a book that like maybe was ahead of the curve about thinking about maybe like what that readership wanted.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think part of it too is like this idea that like reading, like, I know his story was like messed up, so I don't want to read about anything that messed up. And it's like, okay, then maybe contemporary's not doing a good enough job of reflecting our world back to us, because babes,
it's
look around,
right
now.
Right. Like literally right now is so messed up. Right?
Well, what I say all the time, and this is the women in my books, right, writing in 1840, have more rights, bodily autonomy rights, than a large percentage of American women right now. So, like, which one of us is writing the real shit, the real problem? It's incredibly, when you actually think about that, it's like enough to break you and make you lay down.
And and that's it. Like a lot of people who are like, I need people to have access to birth control. And I was like, well, in half of the states in our country, that is not actually that easy to get to. And they are looking to take it away.
And also, I might say a lot of historicals, not just now, not just in the last 5 years, but like historicals have done birth control for a long time. Tinctures, tonic. We have a whole episode about tinctures and tonics. Adriana has written a book about abortion. Joanna Shoup has written about overtly about the Comstock laws. I've written abortion
and also,
clinics.
That book is hot. The book gets even. That book is like rough and tumble.
Listen,
baby.
that begins with a midnight swim. The meet cute is 2 nude people in the Atlantic off the coast of Newport swimming at midnight. And they are.
And there's like biting.
It's
like there's biting.
Amazing.
Okay. So I don't know. Like, guys, like you just have to like put Google to work. Like, because honestly, like there's just a lot out there that is honestly like great. And even the old stuff too. Like,
you have to be careful when you wade in there.
Correct. Because not all Hold up. I just had a traumatic experience over the weekend.
No, you listen, we're not going to name that whole business, but you should have known better.
I flew too close to the sun. I flew too close to the sun. And
you
I
know better.
But
I have a lot of really specific things I don't like about books, right? And so I have really, yeah. You know what? Listen, my reading time is short. I don't apologize for it. Like I actually the other day finally thought of like like something I could say to this because I'm constantly like, how could I make people understand what like this in a way that they don't find offensive? Like I should just read fucking everything. Is I was like, if you were talking about like music and someone was like, oh yeah, I just don't really like whatever, and someone's like, but it's music. Well, yes, it is. And some music I like and some I do not. Like, what the fuck are we talking about here? I'm not allowed to like some things, right? So anyway, one of the things I was thinking about though is shit, I completely lost my fucking train of thought. Now I'm mad.
Wait, I said be careful when you wade in there and you got mad. I saw you and I saw in your face you were like, shut the fuck up, Sarah.
No, that's good. You know what? Yeah, because I'm going to lose my train of thought. You know what it is, everybody? Because of that, I have become a diligent reader of samples, right? Like we live in a time where you can often read fully, usually the first 2 chapters of any book. And you are going to know pretty quickly whether or not this book is for you. And so I just would say, and you know what, like if you're standing in the bookstore, that's a little harder to do. You're not like, I'm going to sit here and read 2 chapters, right? So I would just say if you are, you know, the other thing you can do is just like give reading samples a shot. Like you're not sure this is going to work for you. Well, you do not have to spend your dollars until you get to the point where you read to the end of that sample and you're like, oh yeah, maybe I want to keep going.
So do we have books that we think are like foolproof? I think one book that I think is foolproof for anyone that is okay with a little bit of with paranormal and likes historical is The Magpie Lord by KJ Charles.
Okay.
It is like 200 pages. It's Victorian set. It's set like there's trains. So I can't remember exactly when, but they do ride some trains. He's a duke. But he has inherited this. No, he's an earl. He's inherited it from his father, who he hates because his father put him on a train when he was, put him on a boat when he was 17 and exiled him to China. And he's been in China for 17 years, basically being like doing contraband. He's basically like been breaking the law. And he's like a traitor and he's cursed. He's got a curse on him.
Yes, he is. Of course he is.
So he's trying to like do crazy stuff to himself. So they have to find.
I don't know what that means, but great.
He's like he tries to like bang himself against the wall. Like because the curse is to like for him to like hate himself. Like it's a curse that makes him loathe himself.
He needs a curse for this. Most historical heroes have no trouble hating themselves.
But that's the genius of KJ. He's like, I love myself, but let me put a curse on you that makes you love yourself. So they have to find a witch that can break the curse. And that's where Stephen comes in. Stephen is a curse breaker, but it so happens that Stephen's father was destroyed by the Earl's father. So basically the Earl's father destroyed this witch's family's life. So clearly there's some tension.
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
There's some tension.
There's a little tension there.
And he still saves his life. So there's shenanigans. There's a lot of horror. So if you're a little into gore, like there's some of it. It's, I think, a perfect book. And it's like 200 pages and it does not stop.
And listen, I think this is also the point. I also want to get to, there were a number of people who were like, history is very boring. Like, I don't like history. I know too much about history. I don't like anachronisms. I get trapped, but I get like wrapped up in historical accuracy. Here's what I want to say about all of that. Historical romance is not historical fiction. And it is not nonfiction about history. It is romance that is set against the kind of trappings of history. And so you can have a dude who's been cursed to hate himself who has to find a witch. And that works great in historicals. Or
Yeah,
you
there's
can
some
find, you can, like, we've all seen Bridgerton, right? Like, those books are literally about, like, rich people who are afraid of bees. And, like, that's okay, too. Like,
Sure.
and so I think there is a real sense of like, well, I don't want it to be like school. And when I tell you these books
It is
are
not.
not like school. Well, here's what I'll say. Most of these books are not like school. Sometimes
of them might
they're
be.
really fucking boring. And you know what? Life is too short for boring books, and put that shit down. Come back to Fated Mates. We did not recommend a boring book.
Go read Bare Knuckle Bastards.
Correct. Right?
No,
Any
I
of
mean,
Sarah's
like,
books,
like,
right?
If you like a man
Yeah.
who will happily get naked on a rooftop, Bare Knuckle Bastards is for you.
Women who break into rooms, they like to commit crimes. Like, listen, they like
Lockpicks.
lock picks, boxing, fights. Like, there's just some, like, there's a lot of
Sexy
law
bathtubs.
Yeah, there's a lot of law breaking. And I think part of, again, I think it's that myth of, it's like what my grandma used to read. Hey, grandparents fucked, okay? Like,
Your
not
grandma
much
was
like
into
her,
it.
we wouldn't be here. Don't like throw dirt on grandma because you don't know what she got up to when you didn't exist. And also, I think there is like, I think people, because they're kind of like in their kind of space, like their comfort zone in what they're reading, really kind of need to be forced to explore. Like, we didn't even talk about Sherry Thomas, guys. Like, we didn't even talk about
There you go. Right.
The Luckiest Lady in London, which is like a horny book with mathematics.
That makes it sound exciting.
It is so horny.
Yeah. Sherry writes an amazing book.
Sherry Thomas writes a perfect book every time. Every time.
Yeah. I think the thing, Sherry's books are also, to me, are so careful, right? Like, everything is completely, if you're just, oh God, it's just like so beautiful. It's like sitting in front of like a painting at a museum to me. Like, that's how it's so carefully constructed. I want to talk about Joanna Shupe. I know we've mentioned her a couple times, but I think the Uptown Girls series is pretty much perfect. The Prince of Broadway is kind of my favorite I keep it under glass because it's so perfect. And if you are interested in reading about people who are not going to go along with the rules that they have been taught, right? Then Joanna Shupe is for you, right? And so in The Prince of Broadway, Florence, who is from a very wealthy New York family, this is a Gilded Age, set in Gilded Age New York, which timely, is learned to like essentially like gamble, like hanging out with her grandmother, right? Who, would like have like ladies luncheons, and then they would all like play cards and all this stuff. And Florence wants to open a casino for women.
Bless.
And she doesn't want to get married. She is not interested in the path that her older sister has taken, which is to sort of like, find a husband and get married. And even though Mamie didn't really marry the right man, she did in fact do that, like follow that path. Florence does not want to. And so she goes to Clayton Madden, who is the owner of a casino, and essentially says, I want you to teach me how to run a casino. And he, of course, is like, absolutely not. But I am desperately interested in you and how beautiful you are, right? And so she ends up essentially talking him into it because only Florence could do that. And they break so many rules. And it's like both the rules that society makes for them, but for Clayton, it's more like the rules he's made for himself. And I think the other thing about this is, I think what a lot of people are afraid of in a book like this is that they will still have that the HEA, the happily ever after for a couple like that, will still though feel somehow that they have broken the rules. Like, right, that, well, if it's 1899 or whatever, they have to get married. They have to do whatever. And the thing about Clayton and Florence is that their happily ever after really respects who they have been the entire book. And I think that it is an example of a book that really, again, like this is a very modern dilemma, right?
Yeah.
How do I love my family, but how do I say I don't want to live the life you want for me? Right? So I would say The Prince of Broadway.
That whole series is amazing. I think also Joanna's one of those, like she writes a very specific kind of hero. And for people that like a little darker shade of romance, like Joanna is like, and I feel like especially like that series, like really she was like finding her way to other things that she's exploring now in her pen name. I think like that kind of hero, like that's living like outside of the law and that kind of thing, like really if you are morally gray is your jam, which I know is the jam of many a reader these days, Joanna Shoup delivers every time. That morally dark gray, because these men are like out here doing bad shit.
Well, if you are a contemporary reader who is obsessed with billionaires or the mafia, Joanna Shoup is your historical read-alike for sure.
Yeah,
I love those earlier books too, the tycoon magnate, like
Magnate.
like just like wildly wealthy, like Gilded Age, men who just are brought low by the women in their lives. Which brings me to another thing that came up in the Alexandria survey, because a lot of people were like, I don't want to read a book where the hero and heroine are not equal. And that coming upon that in a number of different places, it kind of kept giving me a little bit of a mind fuck, because I feel like that's the whole point of all romance, like that at the end, the partners are equal. And I feel like that parity is so essential. It's like bedrock to the DNA of historicals. And I understand that it's a question of, if it's a hero who's an aristocrat and a heroine who's like, not, or whatever, it's a man and a woman in Regency England. Like they are not on the same level politically or legally. But I mean, the story of all of these books is he gets brought low.
Right.
Right. Right. It is just interesting to me because I feel like so much of, what is very popular right now, there are those like, I think, okay, let's say legally, and now even that these days is up for debate, but like, if he's wealthy and she's not, like, that's unequal, even if it's 2025, like, like power dynamics and like privilege and like wealth and all those things do like erode equity in terms of like the contract between them. Like we talk about this all the time. Like if like consent, all those things need to be negotiated because there's a power differential. So it is interesting to me that feels like, kind of prohibitive for the reading experience and historical, but that like, in contemporary romance where she's like a bartender or his nanny and he's a billionaire, like that feels okay.
Right. It's interesting to me because I feel like for me, the prototype of this in historical, and I think for me, because of how I came through romance, and I think Jen might agree with me on this, is Julie Garwood's The Bride. Right. Where these two characters, right, like he is the laird of his clan. It's medieval. It's set in Scotland. She is a woman who is, literally like comes from nowhere, like is just like lifted up from her world and set down in his as like essentially like she is brought to marry him. And so it feels the plot, like the structure of the story is these two are not equal. And within like a day, he is fully wrapped around her finger. She has started like multiple wars
Yeah.
Right? Like, and
Right.
she is like she becomes this like unbeatable force in the community, which goes back to your point, Adriana, about like the books have to be about evolving a world, right? But I think that book holds up in a lot of ways if you are looking for what are the bones of this genre and partnered equity. Like,
Yeah.
that's it. That it feels like we should all be just aspiring to write Alec Kincaid. And what's that lady's name? Mine. Her name is Mine. I just pushed it out of Jen's head.
I know. I was like, I don't know. Obviously, I am
what
so
the
mad
fuck?
at you right now.
You shall call her Mine.
Mine.
Also, I would say for
Jamie. Her name is fucking Jamie,
Jamie.
Sarah.
Thank you. Oh my God. Also, I would say for any of you who are looking for like, again, like the language of a historical is the thing that intimidates you. So many people use the word intimidate. Please don't be intimidated by us. We're so fun over here.
Overwhelmed
yeah,
too.
right.
Yeah. But if language is a worry for you, the bride will take care of you.
Yeah, right.
I mean, yeah, and again, the queer romance in general, like there's KJ Charles, there's Alexis Hall, there's
Cat
Olivia
Sebastian.
Witt, there's Cat Sebastian. I have some
TJ Alexander, you mentioned Joanna Lowell,
yes,
who wrote a trans heroine in her historical last year, A Sure Thing.
Emma, I can't remember her last name. She has I love
Emma
you, but like a best friend.
Thoreau. Oh no,
Okay.
you're talking about Emma Albin, but there's
Emma Albin, that's
you're
right.
Those are
Allie Thoreau.
no, there's an Emma Thoreau also, but those aren't queer.
Okay. I was like, wait, too
So
many historical romance.
There's
Yeah.
Alyssa Cole has some queer historicals.
And if you're looking for just a taste, like if you're like, I don't know if I can commit to 400 pages, Alyssa Cole's Harlem Renaissance novella.
Oh yes, it's so good.
Oh, what's it called? Let It Shine is so good. Is that the one?
Yes.
Yes. And she also has like one that's like a sapphic from like the revolution, like during the American Revolution. That is Alyssa Cole writes a really, really great novella.
I think she's one of the best of us when it comes to novellas, yes.
Yeah, and so I think if you want to dip, and they're all diverse, like Alyssa Cole is a Black author. She has a fantastic series set during the Civil War called The
Extraordinary Union.
Extraordinary Union is phenomenal. Like the first one, it's like spies in the South, and it's great. Like there's so much to read. I mean, Courtney Milan has like a bunch of like really feminist, really great historicals that all do all the things that we talked about before. So I don't know. There's like
I just want to say it wasn't Let Us Shine is one of them, and it's great. But the one that I love, the one that like I go back to, is Let Us Dream.
Let Us Dream.
It's set during the Harlem Renaissance. The heroine Bertha is a cabaret owner, and she hires an Indian chef to work in her cabaret, and it's like. The whole thing is about it's set against the election or the vote for to give women the vote. And it's in New York City, and it feels so like rich and beautiful. And there's like vice raids and lots of questions about immigration. So it feels really, really important still. It's continues to do the important work of romance. It's great. Let Us Dream.
I want to shout out my we have mentioned Beverly Jenkins, but I want to shout out, I'm always ready to talk about one of my favorites, which is Nighthawk. So if you're like, I think that like what I would say is like, if you're a person who is interested in like I don't want to just read about white people in ball gowns or whatever, but you're a person who's like, I don't want to also feel like I've been like, I don't know, like the history is being shoved down my throat. I think Bev writes, the history is there, but it is so seamlessly incorporated into the story itself that you are not going to feel like it's too heavy. Like she's never going to stop and be like, now let me tell you about, I don't know, like westward expansion or whatever. Like it's in the book. That's what the books are about, but this is not like the way that she writes. And so instead, if you're interested, often she will have like a afterword in the back where she'll like sort of mention like, hey, these are the real historical things I was talking about. And you could just like go read more on your own if you want it to be like dry nonfiction or whatever. So Nighthawk is one of my favorites because it is essentially a road trip romance, only the road trip is the train. And so Nighthawk is our sort of bounty hunter, and then Maggie Freeman is like the woman that he falls in love with. So it is terrific. It's like one of my favorites, and it is just like a ride, like a literal ride. Like it's so much fun.
I mean, this can go wrong.
You literally, and they're, like you said earlier, 50 something books, probably more.
I was just going to say, I mean, I always talk about Forbidden because I really do love that book a lot. And I also think it's a great introduction to Beverly Jenkins because it is like, there's like,
so perfect.
She gets abducted. His backstory is so compelling. Like I think there's two backstories that I feel like are like burned into my brain of historical romance heroes, and it's Danes and it's Respontaines. Those two prologues to me are like canon in historical romance. They are just perfectly executed, and they just bring you into that story fully ready to like root for this man who you have a lot of reasons not to root for him for.
For me, the recommendation that I often give to people who've like never read a historical and like want to understand how like crazy they can be, like how fun and not crazy, how fun they can be, is To Catch a Raven, which is one of her most recent books, because the premise is that the heroine is undercover in a Confederate senator's house or a Confederate representative's house, or a Confederate person's leader's house, and she steals a copy of the Declaration of Independence and has to fake a marriage with the hero, who is also there with the Union government, and they are like working together to like shenanigan the Declaration of Independence out of this man's house. And listen, it's a real ride and so fun. And I think that's the thing that I wish anybody who had never read a historical could take away from it, is like, these books are really fun. They are, one of the things, and what I'd like to end with is, one person just said, they seem really dry. So my question to you both is, what is the wettest historical romance that you would recommend?
The wettest. Oh,
that's what she said. Okay.
That's what she said.
I am going to go first because then I can be the one to take Gorilla Twins. Which and what I was going to say is, and like, listen, this is not, if you've listened to the podcast, we've mentioned this book. Eric's right now is like, oh, Gorilla Twins again. Yeah. Fuck you. Right. But it is, I mean, and what I was thinking though is like, in a contemporary, if something just defies all of common sense and logic and reason, you would be like, I can't, this is just too silly. Gorilla Twins, the real title of which is The Earl Takes All by Lorraine Heath, is like the romance equivalent of that scene from like Fast and the Furious, whatever it was, where they drive the car from one skyscraper into the other.
I haven't seen that one.
And you're watching it and you're like, I don't think that's how gravity works, but sure. That is what this book is. And basically, it's twin brothers. One is married to the woman of their dreams because the other one is in love with her. They go off to Savannah, like they go off to Africa on like a trip, and they're twins. And
Say it.
One of them is killed by a gorilla, and the other one impersonates his brother and goes back home and basically is like, yeah, I'm your husband. It's too bad my bad brother died.
You guys, I know. How could you think this is boring?
Right. That is, like I said, you just dropped or like in another Fast and the Furious movie where a car drops out of a plane with a parachute on it and then lands and drives. That's what that is.
I mean, that might, for the record, that might be the wettest historical romance.
That's why I was like, I better go first because I'm not someone else is going to say it before me.
You might have actually just said it.
Yeah, right?
Adriana?
I don't know. It's very hard to pick just one. It's very hard to pick just one. But I am going to go with Any Old Diamonds by KJ Charles.
I love that book so much.
That's a good one.
Because to me, it does all the things that I love about a historical romance, and it executes it perfectly. Plus, the sex in that book is unmatched to me personally. Like other people might have other opinions.
No, it's so hot. It's so great.
In that book, and the way that the sex is done, to me, you are perfect. You know that scene from Love Actually? You're perfect to me. That's perfect. It is. I'm gonna say so. It is very twisty, so I cannot give too much away because the twists and the reveals in that book are just
so perfect.
I have read that book a dozen times at least, and I to this day don't know how she pulls that off. It is basically this, young man who is an artist, but his father is the son of a duke. He's like the second son of a duke, but this duke. The rumor is that he killed his wife to marry his mistress. It's like 10 years after his wife has died, and he has basically disowned his children. And so his children, who he is one of them, is basically living like almost destitute. Like they're like living in poverty. So he hires thieves to go and steal from his father, like this set of jewels that he's bought for his wife's, like for their like 20th anniversary or whatever. And it's like a complete romp. There's so many shenanigans. And so like the romance is between him and this thief, or they're called the Lily White Boys, like the two thieves that he hired. And it is just nonstop twists and turns. The tension between those two and the chemistry is phenomenal. And honestly, and it's like 250 pages.
Yes, again, so tight.
So tight, so perfect. The reveals are unbelievable. And honestly, the social just like everything that KJ Charles does in that book, she executes it perfectly. And there's a second book in that series called Gilded Cage, which is only I think the only MF that I've ever read of hers. And it is just as good, but it's with the other thief.
All right, Sarah, what about you? The wettest.
Well, if you remove Lorraine, I'm removing Lorraine Heath from the running because I actually think like they're like all like once you're
Lorraine
in,
likes it real wet. It's fine,
right? So it feels to me like the person who really I think introduced me to like how wild they could get is Elizabeth Hoyt, who was mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for me, they're all like Beauty and the Beast retellings in like the most intense way. Like if you've ever done anything like that. if you've ever been into Beauty and the Beast, Elizabeth Hoyt is your person, but I have to say The Raven Prince. And The Raven Prince is basically the setup is the hero is like a loner, and his secretary leaves, and a widow from town takes the job to like come and be his secretary, and he is very stern and like beastie, and he is not very kind to her, but they are like quietly falling like desperately into each other's, like they just can't stop wanting each other. Of course they will never make good on this. But she had this like really decent marriage where she like had orgasms and like knew what pleasure could be. And so she finds in his papers that he pays annually for membership to like this gentleman's club where he like disappears to now more frequently than ever because he is like so pent up with his frustration that he can't have her. And then she takes herself one day, he's planning to go to this gentleman's club, and she takes herself there and meets the lady proprietress of this gentleman's club and convinces her to let her be like masked in his room. And then they just have the wickedest, wildest sex imaginable, masked. And then they like return to their normal lives, and everything is worse because they are just like hotter for each other. And it's this dance of like, when are they going to figure it out? How long can this possibly go on? How is it possible that two people cannot notice that the other is masked? And like, how is it possible that he cannot notice that this like masked woman is sitting in his office, like hot for him all the time? It's wild and sexy, and Elizabeth Hoyt is like a real scene, but you won't be bored.
I just want to just to close down. You can cut me off after this. Elizabeth Hoyt did in fact write a series called the Maiden Lane series, which is very high heat. It's basically like bordering erotic romance, and all the heroes are based on superheroes. Like she's got a Batman in
Victorian there, or Georgian Batman.
So just know that out there is a book series written by Elizabeth Hoyt that you can read today, where there is a Georgian Batman.
Yeah, they literally caped Crusader.
Do yourself a favor, just Google Charming Mickey.
Oh yeah, the River Pirate,
and go with God, and go with.
Listen, we haven't even talked about listen, I wouldn't necessarily, again, be careful wading into these waters, but pirates.
I mean,
we own pirates, y'all.
That is a bit of a treacherous area, but Beverly Jenkins does have pirates. I, in fact, have the proof framed in my captured by Beverly Jenkins, the most famous privateer in the Caribbean Sea.
Mm-hmm. And think of like whole generations of like aristocrats who masquerade as criminals.
Oh yeah. Listen.
Highwaymen galore.
Historical really has it all.
If you like a crime in your book, like if you like a criminal if you think criminals are hot, like old school criminals, not like these white collar billionaire criminals that we're dealing with now. I'm talking about like masked, like, stand and deliver, give me all your jewels. Historical has got you.
The Highwayman by Kerrigan Byrne. You want a tortured man? I mean, it's tortured.
That's basically if you liked The Saint with Val Kilmer.
I feel like you were about to like launch into the thing from Moonstruck. This man is tortured. I'm sorry. Fine.
Get me the big knife.
Well, here's the good news. Next week, we are going to be back, and Sarah and I will be talking about all of the great historicals that we have never talked about before. We are really committed to trying to bring new historicals to you. And in the meantime, everybody, I hope, has one-clicked or gone to bookshop.org and downloaded the Adriana's newest book,
A Tropical Rebel Gets the Duke.
A Tropical Rebel Gets the Duke. I was like, a Caribbean Rebel Gets the Duke, and that is not what it's called. A Tropical Rebel Gets the Duke. It is fantastic, and it is going to make you feel
It's going to make you feel great. You're going to be like, thank God for romance.
Yes. It is going to make you feel.
Thank God
That's
for
what we're here for.
romance.
Thank God for romance.
And then Google Charming Mickey, Scandalous Desires.
I mean, don't send these new people deep into the Hoyt catalog yet.
I mean, can you get crazier than Newgate prison sex? Which actually does happen there. Just know that many people have to be bribed.
Amazing.
Oh my God. Anyway, there's a lot for you over here in historical. Thanks to Alexandria Bellefleur for trusting us with this data. We hope we did it justice. She's great. Like I said, her books are in show notes. Please go support her too. She's doing what she can to save the genre with us. Thank you, Adriana Herrera. We love you so much. At this point, like we owe you lots of things for all the times that you've been on the episodes with us. I'm Sarah McLean. I'm here with Adriana Herrera and Jen Prokop. We are Fated Mates. You can find us every Wednesday wherever you get your podcasts, and you can find us online at fatedmates.net, where you can read our show notes, get lists of all the books that we recommend and we talk about during the episodes, and anything else that we sort of throw out that we're going to leave down there. Jen does those every week, and they're amazing. Go check them out. You can also still find us online so far at Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky, but who knows? It could all change in an instant. So meet us at fatedmates.net. And if you just want a safe place to talk about romance novels these days, a place that's locked down where you can just talk to a bunch of other like-minded people who also want to know what the wettest romance novel is, head over to our Patreon. That is at patreon.com/fatedmates. Every month you'll get a special episode from Jen and me, and you can access the Discord where few thousand Fated Mates listeners are talking about romance all day, every day. And don't forget that if you stay tuned, you'll get a special sneak peek for Fated Mates listeners of Chloe C. Peñaranda's The Night is Defying, a new book out from Macmillan Audio. Thanks to Macmillan Audio and Chloe Peñaranda for sponsoring this week's episode.
I held a dagger to my heart, knowing he would come. This bargain, our bond, would summon him from the risk to my life.
There are more enticing ways to get my attention, Starlight.
I wanted to deny the silk of his silvery voice caressing my skin in pleasure. I wished the rage I harbored would translate it to disgust. If what you said is true, this shouldn't kill me, I challenged. Maybe I was losing my sanity. But being held captive between stone and iron, even for the single day he'd locked me here, had grown my resentment beyond caring.
No, but it would hurt. A lot.
His hand curled around the bar as his golden irises danced. The bastard was enjoying this.
And there is only one place I wish to hear your screams, where I can own them.
My hand poised with my stormstone blade fell as I pinned him with a heated glare. You own nothing of me, I seethed. I made the dagger vanish through the starlight void. I paced, trying to focus. While I had become accustomed to retrieving that one item, I had yet to figure out how to move through it like Night could. My fists flexed as I paced, as though imagining them around his neck would spur enough determination to succeed.
Estrella.
His voice dropped low and my eyes scrunched to it, hating the low tone of a plea.
Just one more day.
I gave a bitter laugh. I hope it was worth it, I said. My teeth clenched to the ache of my heart. Gaining their loyalty at my expense?
That is not what this is.
Then what the fuck is it? My eyes burned, but I wouldn't shed a single tear for him.
Protection.
Control, I corrected in a cold calm. That's what you told them. You forced me to retrieve the key to display your power over me. You should kill me with it. For the second you let me free, I will find a way to kill you. He'd taken the key and somehow blocked my ability to retrieve it. Maybe I was glad when this captivity made me volatile, and I couldn't be sure what my untrained power could be capable of.
You are absolutely stunning.
My resentment took an ugly turn. I called you here because I want you to tell me about my bonded. The one Drystan mentioned, I said, enjoying how it wiped the smile from his face.
You had a lot to process as it was. Drystan had no right to throw that at you when he did.
Knight snarled. I'm glad he did, I taunted. Maybe I'll find this other person more tolerable than you. Shadow touched me before his skin did. A feather-like caress of his fingers mimicked the darkness trailing up my arm.
Why won't you wear the things I brought you?
I don't want things. I want to get the hell out of here. I didn't look to the change of clothing on the bed. It was tempting and beautiful. Something like a gown, but there was also leather pants and high boots. My pettiness made me not want to take anything from him.
It wasn't safe.
It'll never be safe. You have a court of vampires above us that all want me dead.
Wrong. They want you alive, now that they understand that so long as I live too, you being alive keeps the Celestials weak.
The reminder of our doomed existence crushed me every time. Controlled, then.
More like it, yes. You would make their greatest ally.
You would force me?
I could.
Knight loved this game between us. I wanted it to burn. He tipped my chin slowly, and I kept my eyes cold. Knight murmured,
I want you to belong with me.
Thank you for listening to this clip provided to you by Macmillan Audio. To hear more, look for this title wherever audiobooks are sold.